Hi there, this is Doug. This is going to be a short-ish discussion on customer return goods and using the return goods queue, something that we're currently having a little bit of issue with, and hopefully we will sort out in fairly short order. All right, so let's start off with doing a sales order so that we have something to return. We're going to make Solar bleep at me because I love that. Alright, we're going to go ahead and pick one of our test customers off of our system. We're going to do the credit customer and new. Alright, we're going to pick one of our test products, or at least a couple of them. And we're going to try a transfer product. Yep, okay. And we're going ahead and complete the sales. Since this is a customer with a line of credit, we're not going to take any cash, so we're not going to do any entry there. Oops. And this is a counter order, so we're picking it up now and completing it, and we're not printing anything. Alright, so say 2 days later, customer comes back and returns the item, and now we got to deal with it. So a return is a reverse sales order. If you're dealing with something that was shipped defective from the vendor, then it would be a negative purchase order. Anyway, so we're going to do our test customer again, our credit test customer, and we're going to do a new one. And okay, and once again, sales order entry. Now we're going to do the same thing, but in reverse. So a negative quantity of the test transfer product. Okay, when we do that, the return goods verification window will pop up, and it's a little strangely shrunk right now. Okay, now it's expanded up. Okay, so there's a lot of things we can do here. Quite often the return will be processed and the item will be put in the return goods review queue, where it's supposed to be looked at, tested, and make a decision often if it's defective and it needs to be returned to the vendor, or if it is something that's resellable and is returned to stock. We can put in a RGA number if this is a defective and we get an RGA from the vendor. Of course, you can't return something without an RGA number. You know how that goes. If you've got the thing right in front of you, you know it's good and you know it's returning to stock, you can go ahead and just return it directly to stock and it won't even go into the queue. But that's not normally how it's done. Alright. So in this particular case, we're going to say that the item is defective, F. We don't have an RGA number yet, so we're going to leave that as is. There's not going to be a restocking fee because it's defective. Okay. And we're going to put in a little comment here, and we're good to go on that one. Yes, and of course it's going to bark at me because I didn't give the reason code. Darn it. Yes, defective means defective. Alright, save the changes. Alright, now this pop-up is going to look at this customer and look at every sales order where this product has been purchased to link it to the sales order. This is mainly to make sure it matches the pricing. If the pricing has changed between one day and the next, you want to credit the customer for how much they paid for it, not necessarily what it might be priced as today. So that's what that is for. Typically, it's going to automatically say if there were 4 invoices, I'm going to select the oldest one first. But since we've only got one, we're going to select one. And yes, select the current item. All right. Here we see that it's referenced the sales order that we have selected and priced accordingly. Okay. Now to finish this, we're going to complete this transaction now. So this is going to be another pickup now. Come on. Because it's counter. Yeah. And we close this up. Yes. All right. Now this step of the process, this is given the customer a credit, but we've marked this thing as defective, and now it's in limbo. It's not in the inventory. It's in a kind of off to the side area, and it needs to be processed further in order to reconcile the inventory. Now you can tell a variety of ways of what you've got going on in the inventory that's in limbo. One place where this shows up well is in a location report. So for instance, if we went and looked at product location maintenance, warehouse maintenance, product location maintenance, branch 1, see test, and we take a look at our, what was that? That was a test transfer product, I think it was. All right, and here we can see in location maintenance, we've got one of these in location return. What the heck does that mean? Yeah, this is in limbo land. Hopefully it's on a shelf marked returns in your warehouse if you got your shit together and you're somewhat organized. And it will be tagged to the sales order, the return sales order, the negative sales order. If you run location reports, this will show up as well. So, closing location maintenance. Hopefully people watching have been familiar with Eclipse reports. If you're not, in brief, Eclipse reports is a simple web-based reporting tool that's found here under Eclipse reports. And we're having a little slowness with Eclipse today. Come on, Eclipse. There we go. All right. Now I have a report that I regularly run that gives me all the locations that the products are in for branch 1. All right. That's what it looks like, a preview of what the data should look like. And when I run it and export it to Excel, I get something that looks like this. All right. And normal locations will look as such. Sorry, wrong tab. Like these. I've already separated the returns out. These location info, these are stock locations of nothing. It means that there's a quantity in the warehouse, but no location has been entered for them. This is not something that should ever be, right? If you got it, you should know where it's at. Then later on, we see here, okay, here's actually products in locations. And hopefully in a perfect world, if I went to that location, I would find two of those there. And this is just telling us this is the primary location. All right. On this report, returns show up as well, and they look like this. And you remember the different types. So you're going to have F for defective and R for review, and you could have S for stock, I think, and still have it return. But these are all things that need to be processed and get a credit or written off from the system, or else they're going to stay there in limbo forever, and it kind of messes up our inventory. Things like these, the O overstock and R returns, I mean, you should have a process where every few weeks you're looking at these in the queue and deciding whether to return these to vendor and get them the hell out of your building, or return them to stock so you can actually sell them. Until you do that final step, you can't do anything with them. So always keep in mind when you're in the sales order and you credit the customer, or you're in purchase order entry and you do some funky stuff there to kind of reconcile, you've only done half the process. Yeah, you may have adjusted some of the accounting, but you haven't completed the process. You have to finish it with the return goods queue. All right. So now that we beat that dead horse, return goods queue you will find under purchase under queues. And as has been mentioned before, the way Eclipse was designed was to kind of think of everything as a batch process, or as they referred to it as buckets. There might be 3 or 4 or 5 steps to a sales order, and you might have a different person or set of people working on each step. And so what typically happens is everything's busted up into sections and queues, and once one person has done their part and completed their end, it goes in the bucket for the next person in line to check their queue and process the rest of it. So this queues function is a fabulous way of managing your workload, managing your day, and keeping things organized and prioritized. So it was a very clever idea of theirs. Alright, so return goods queue. This is obviously something that should be checked regularly. In this case, we're going to do branch 1. We're going to do all the price lines. I don't care which buyer, both received and unreceived. I'm going to take a look at review items only this time. Alright, so in review items, we've got 6 items here, and some of them are a bit old. And ideally, these are in limbo. You can't sell it until this flag is changed. So this needs to be taken care of. In this particular case, let us assume, since it is 4 years old, that it wasn't needed. It got put back on stock, not returned, and it's sitting on a shelf, and we don't know it's on a shelf because we didn't complete the process, so it's sitting in limbo. It's on the shelf and never to be sold again. So let's take that little dude and make it sellable again. So once this line is highlighted, we right-click on the screen and we can do Inquiry Product Location Maintenance. That'll pop us right into the location maintenance. And here we've got a couple of things that are returns. These returns are defective. This return is a review. Alright, so to return this thing to stock in product location, we just change its status back to stock. Now, Eclipse is usually going to bark at you if it sees multiple locations of the same type. This time it's not, though. Okay. So ideally, these things would all be in the same place. So I would do an adjustment to make sure it's in the proper location, or else it's just I'm gonna have one of them that's in the middle of nowhere. So you don't necessarily have to do that. The most important thing is return to stock, but even better, it's return to stock in the proper location. So we see it has a permanent location, but there's 0 in it. Let's assume that there's 1 in there. So we're going to move the 1 there and change it to 0, so we're not changing our overall quantities. Everything is going to reconcile to the original count. Alright, and when we go ahead and finish this and save the changes, there we are. If you're an e-term, this should probably drop off the list automatically. If you're in Solar, you have to click update, and then when you run the update again, it will disappear off the list. The overstocks generally the same way. Normally you would not return those to the vendor. Usually you got a couple extra. Quite often if the receiving's off and there's an overstock, they'll just adjust the order count and will never show up. But quite often you're just gonna go ahead and get charged for one more and go ahead and just add it to your stock. To deal with overstocks, you'd of course uncheck review, look at overshipments, update that. And yeah, wonderful. So this is all the way back in 2017. It's probably a safe bet that it's still sitting on the shelf and we never returned it. So let's go ahead and return that one to stock. As we see, this is type O. Now, of course, returning it to stock is not our only option. We could do a return to vendor. In that case, you select return to vendor and you would type in the price line of the vendor, Juno in this case, and then you would go ahead and add to an existing purchase order or create a new one, create a return order, and that would create a negative purchase order so you can get an RGA number and pack it and ship it back to the vendor and get your money back. This is so old though, we're going to assume that who knows, and let's hope it's actually was put in inventory. So once again, we're going to go back here and inquiry and product location maintenance, and okay, here we have, yep, we have a return. More than likely this location, which only shows one quantity, probably was an inventory adjustment because they waited so darn long. It was actually this item here that was in limbo that got added. Of course, there's no way to know, so now I'm going to have to add it into inventory, and we'll have to pick it up on the next inventory cycle count. So we change that to stock. Okay, I'll leave that as return. In this case, I'm going to leave it in limbo land instead of changing the quantity here to 2, because honestly, I don't know. All right, so once we've done that, and save changes. All right. Now, as I said, this will not drop off the list in Solar until you do updates. So let's do an update again, and it will rerun everything. And as we can see, it is dropped off the list. So that is how to deal with reviews and overships and returning to stock anyway. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is defectives and return to vendors for credit. So for defectives, we're going to go ahead here, uncheck that, and select defective and update. And if we change the order here at the top of the order, here is my return of the test transfer product, which we said was defective, where we started with the beginning of this video. Okay, so first step, return to, and there's a couple of different ways to do this, but let's see here. Oops. Okay, so we're going to return to vendor, and it'll do this pop-up so I can search and put in the vendor. We're going to put in our test vendor. Okay, so selecting the vendor is just kind of the first grouping. That doesn't complete the process, of course. Typically, you would be going through the review queue, and you would be adding all these to negative purchase orders to return to the vendor, and you'd be calling up the vendor ahead of time and getting RGA numbers, putting that information on the return PO, boxing up everything, and then forwarding the negative PO information to the vendor. So this is just the first step of the process. Now, it would be, usually you would create the return purchase order on the first one, and then you keep going through the list, and then you would add the rest of them to that purchase order. So the first time you would create a purchase order, and if you didn't have one already available, and no, don't even think of being lazy and adding it to an already existing positive purchase order, because if you mix negatives and positives together, your purchasing agent is going to come and slap you probably, if the purchasing agent isn't used. Anyway, return purchase orders and purchase orders should always be separate things. So in this case, we're going to create the return order. All right, and there we go. And it's already referenced this sales order here. Now we can modify the note here and put in the RGA number if we've got different RGA numbers for each component that's on this return. Although that's would be unusual. Typically they'd give you one RGA number for the whole list of things. In that case, if you have one RGA number, you would probably put it here on the vendor instructions. So that would print out on the negative purchase order. All right. In this case, we'd be assuming that as we're going through the review queue, we're going to be adding more to this PO, and so we would leave it open. And I'm going to write this number down here real quick in case I need to get back to this. 11863. Yep. All right. So, and then we close this down. And now it's sitting there open. It's not completed because we're going to add more things to it. As we would go through, and there would be more of those items to return to that particular vendor, we would return to, select that vendor, and then we would do add to purchase order, and a pop-up would show up, allow us to select that the open purchase order to add it to, and you go back and forth until you have everything in your negative purchase order for your return. As you can see, this is a much nicer process than having to track things in spreadsheets and then try and do all this stuff after the fact. Anyway, so as you can see here in the review queue under defectives, you see 1 of 1525. We have got 1525 separate SKUs of returns that need to be processed. Or, because we've been kind of sloppy, a lot of them may have already been processed, and who knows. 2017, it would seem pretty unusual that all of those have not already long ago been processed, scrapped, or whatever. And even if they weren't that old, the vendor would probably never take it back anyway. As a general rule, if you don't have your returns processed within 1 year of the transaction, the PO date, they're not going to accept it and not going to give you credit. So this is why it's so darned important to keep track of this in a timely manner. Now once again, at 1525, how's that? I just love it when the jets strafe my house while I'm trying to record a video. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. Next step in the process. So, I was saying, as we see here in our product locations report, we have extra positive confirmation that, yeah, there really are 1,555 things in the queue to be processed. Luckily, it looks like 10 or so of them are probably return to stocks and over return to stocks, but that still leaves 1,529 that need to be figured out. Did we return them to the vendor already and already get the credit and finish the processing, or do they need to be processed and returned or scrapped or adjusted or such? Of course, there's going to be cases where the vendor will not take it back, and in that case you'll just have to do a adjustment and write it off, and that's a typical adjustment journal entry. which I will not get into in great detail at the moment, because it's accounting and we all love accounting, right? So the next step is after we've processed as much of the queue as we're going to, and we're going to process that return to the vendor for credit, then we can complete what we need to do in purchase order entry. So we're going to put in our test vendor, and there's our open PO for our return. Yep, negative test product. All very good. Now, generally from this point, you would call them up. You'd give them, send them this printout, get an RGA number, send the printout, that type of thing. That would be put in the header notes, possibly under the order ID as well. If it's put under order ID, it's searchable anyway. Then you would go ahead and if you hadn't already, email a copy of that, and you might want to print a copy of it for your records, which wouldn't be done under status here. This is left open until the accounts payable department gets a credit memo from the vendor. When they finally get that credit memo, then they will go in and they will change the order status from open to received. When you receive a negative purchase order, now the credit has been added to that vendor's account, and everything has been cleared properly, and now we can take the credit on our next order or cash check, or whichever way this particular vendor handles things. And this is generally, as shortly as I can make it, how the return goods process should be handled. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you for your time and attention. Have a good day.